Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. This is Pastor Sandy from Soldiers for Christ, saying a blessing to our Father in heaven. And if you've seen the first two videos, we're trying to teach you and prepare the world for the tribulations which is right upon us. We're looking at the rapture happening before the end of 2010, and we're trying to warn the world of the complete setup. We're going to make another video after this, and we're going to even show you the setup of what the Illuminati and what the money makers, the IMF, the International Monetary Funds, and how they're controlling the finances of this world, and how they're moving this world slowly into a one world government. But right now, I want to show you God's plan, because God has a plan of escape. Now, one thing we talked about was 1948. Now, we talked about three things. Abraham was born in the 1948th year of man's existence. So, understanding that is that God already knew that the second Israel would be born 1948 years after the birth of Christ. So, you have the birth of Israel being shown twice in the scriptures, and once we've experienced it in ourselves, the rebirth of Israel in 1948. Now I want to show you something before we get to the topic of this story. Now in 2 Kings chapter 25 verse 8, it says, on the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, commander of the imperial guard and official king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal place, and all the house of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. And listen what it says in the beginning. It says, in the 19th year, the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's rule, he took Israel into captivity. But he came back 19 years later, and it says right here, he burnt down the temple in Jerusalem. So that means Israel's fall they fell 19 years apart. So they fell 19 years apart. So then after their punishment of 2,520 years was over, they came back onto the earth 19 years apart. As you can see here, Israel was rebirthed in 1948. Then in 1967, they had the Six-Day War, and Jerusalem was won back to the Jews. So they fell 19 years apart, and here you are, God put them back on the planet 19 years apart. So what am I trying to tell you? That God is in control of time. He has already told what will happen before it will happen, so that you will know when it happens that it is God. I want to talk to you about one other thing, because the 1967 war happened in 6 days, and on the 7th day, Israel had victory and had Jerusalem back in his hand in June 1967. Now here in the book of Joshua, it says here in chapter 6, it says, the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into the hands along with its kings and fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry the trumpet of ram horns in front of the ark, and on the 7th day march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpet. When you hear the sound of the blast on the trumpet, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the walls of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in. So that is what happened. Now this is at the time of Joshua. This was a 6-day war, the same that happened in 1967. So in 1967, Israel got into a 6-day war with its Arab neighbors, and they attacked Israel first. But when the 1967 6-day war was over, Israel, for the first time in 2,520 years, had Jerusalem back into their possession. So you're seeing the hand of God as it brought Israel back onto the planet in 1948 and then brought Jerusalem back into their hand 19 years later, the same as the time that they fell 19 years later back into the land of Jerusalem. And the Jews have been there for 60 years. And no matter who goes to war against them, they cannot conquer this small little country because the world don't understand that God is on their side. Now, what is the important thing about 1967? 1967 began the last Jubilee of all time. What is a Jubilee? Let's go to the book of Leviticus, and I'm going to explain it to you. Now, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 8, it says, God says, count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, and that's 49 years. So that the 7 Sabbaths of years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sound everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month on the Day of Atonement. Sound the trumpet throughout the land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It will be called the Jubilee. Now that's what the Jubilee is. It's counting off 49 years, and then on the 50th year, then liberty is set throughout all the land. And then on the 50th year, that is when all land is returned to the rightful owners. Now in 1967, the rightful owners of Jerusalem was in the possession of the Jews because they were the rightful owners. But if you count from 1967 to 2017, you have 50 years. So God has started the last Jubilee of all time. So this Jubilee from 1967 will last till 2017. We have seen 40 of that 50 years count off. So now we're looking at the year 2009 is upon us. We're about to sing Happy New Year to each other. 2009, we may get all of 2009 before the church is gone. And we may get even half of 2010 before the church is gone. That's not a promise because God can take his church out at any time. So we know that a rapture is about to happen because we're on the last 50 years to 2017 of the Jubilee. Now, one other thing that I need to tell you, and it's found in the book of Acts. And Christ is going to remain in heaven until when? Until the last Jubilee. In Acts chapter 3, verse 21, it says, let's start at verse 20. And that he may send the Christ who has been appointed for you, even Jesus. He must remain in heaven until the time comes for God to restore everything, as he promised long ago through his holy prophets. So Christ left, and it says he has to stay in heaven until the restoration of all things. What is the restoration of all things? The restoration of all things is the Jubilee time. And the Jubilee is the 50th year. Now, we've been trying to tell you over and over again. God created this world in 6 days, and each of those days represented 1,000 years. Now, we are on year 5,991. January 1st, we'll be on 5,992. So you have to understand that we are at the end of this time. And the rapture is upon us. We're counting down the last Jubilee, and Christ is about to take control of his city. God bless.